Let's get into a water issue which is incredibly important, especially when you combine it with energy. It's hydroelectric power. In the studio with me is Claire Faulkvane, who is Programme Director of Africa Utility Week. Claire, thanks very much for popping in. First of all, if you take 100 units of energy that's generated every day on the African continent, how much of that is hydropower?
I'd say quite a large portion of it. The hydropower is spread obviously according to where the resources are the most abundant. So in East Africa, for instance, you find that in some countries between 65 and 80% of their electricity is generated from hydro. In Southern Africa, there's also quite a large portion of that in countries like Zimbabwe, Mozambique specifically. Even in Namibia, believe it or not, there is quite a lot of hydropower that is being used on a daily basis.
And it's obviously linked to the amount of water there is and the type of water there is.
Absolutely. Hydropower is reliant very much on the flow of the water, how much water passes past a certain point in a certain number of minutes or seconds, if there is a sufficient drop to help keep the turbines running, that kind of thing. So there's unfortunately a number of issues that need to be taken into consideration.
So it's regional, it's country specific, it's area specific.
Yes.
Can that power be exported though? Of course it can, we know
Absolutely. We buy quite a large portion of our electricity, or about 2,000 megawatts from Mozambique. So there is also a big dam that's being built in Ethiopia at the moment, and they plan on being a mass exporter of electricity into the East African market. Of course, the biggest potential is in the DRC, where there is a proposed hydropower plant on the Congo River, which has the capacity to generate ultimately about 40,000 megawatts. That is just short of what we as South Africa generate. The problem.
Are we involved in that?
We have just recently signed a memorandum of understanding with the DRC. This is a project that's been many years in the making, and of course there are always challenges with projects that take so many countries into account, because it wouldn't just be the DRC and South Africa. Mozambique, potentially, but definitely Botswana, Angola, Namibia, all of those countries would be involved, because there would be transmission lines and they would all want to share some of the potential from that 40,000 megawatts.
And of course the other thing is that this all sounds very, very fine and well on paper, and you can create this enormous amount of energy which will electrify so many homes, but on the other hand you are disturbing the natural balance of things water-wise, and there are going to be people that will be up in arms, because you mentioned off-air earlier on about what's happening in East Africa. The water resources are diminishing. So maybe hydroelectric power will not be as prominent in that part of the world, simply because of, what is it, the cyclical nature of water, or something more sinister?
I think it has probably got a lot more to do with climate change and the fact that the rainfall patterns across the continent are changing. Africa is definitely becoming more and more of a water scarce region. One of the benefits, for instance, of the Congo project is, or the DRC project, is that it straddles the equator, so it has the benefit of both winter rain or summer rain on both sides of the equator, so the flow is almost constant throughout the year. And it is what they call a run-of-the-river project, so there's no damming. It's literally the river just continues to flow, and that of course is where the benefit is if you can have a river that can generate electricity without having to be dammed, there's no knock-on effect further down the cycle.
So it's not the same as that very famous project in China, where exactly, where the Chinese build a dam and say to the 2.5 million people that are going to be affected because their towns and villages are going to be submerged, they say, you've got to go, unfortunately, off you go, we've built you somewhere else. You can't do that in many other countries. I mean, China is one thing, but Africa is another.
Absolutely, and the thing is, the challenge for a government and for a utility is to balance the socio-economic needs of the people versus the power and the development needs of the country. And I think, ideally, run of the river is the best way. In South Africa, we use quite a lot of hydro, but we use it for peaking electricity. So it's stuff that at sort of between 5 and 9 in the night, we would use the hydroelectric power, and then it's basically, you have a dam, and it runs down into another dam. And at night, when it's really late at night, sort of 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, that electricity is pumped back up to the top dam. So we're using the electricity that has to be there anyway, but we're actually making peak power electricity at a far lower cost than bringing on things like diesel or heavy fuel oil, which
when we
is
look at our energy
expensive.
needs, Claire, we talk about coal and we talk about nuclear and whether we should do this and whether we're going to build a wind farm up the west coast, all that sort of thing. But is hydro being underutilised? Is there more potential in South Africa to start with? And before we go north of here, is there more? Is there more that we can do?
Not on a large scale, no. I think on a small scale, yes, and that would sort of what would be great about it is that it brings your generation closer to the areas that are actually using it and needing it. But I think if we're looking at from a base load perspective, probably not in South Africa. In other parts of Africa, absolutely. Zambia, Botswana, Mozambique are busy doing extensions to their current hydropower. So they say that about 50% of the confirmed hydro resources are not being exploited at the moment. So there is definitely potential for it. I guess it, as with anything, depends on the money, the political will, and of course the impact on the local peoples.
I would imagine with
area.
Africa coming to the fore economically and a growing middle class and also an more easy way of doing business rather than in the dark days of the past where it's quite difficult to do business with an African government. Now it's opened up to the world. There would be people queuing up to come here and to invest in hydroelectric power on the continent.
I think that the perception of Africa as an investment destination is definitely changing. But the problem with power, of course, is that it's a very long-term investment. And it's not just a simple case of saying, oh, well, let's build a hydroelectric dam or let's build a power plant, because there are so many other things that need to be taken into account. The ability of the people in that region to actually pay what it would cost to generate the electricity. And that often, from an IPP perspective, is where the big challenge is that what they would like in terms of a return and in terms of what it costs to generate the electricity is sometimes beyond the actual reach of the people that live in a country, which then brings in subsidies and all sorts of other challenges. So unfortunately, in Africa in particular, power is a very emotive and challenging subject.
Yes, it is, but it always seems to me that the others that I mentioned earlier on get pushed to the top of the list, and hydro is right down there at the bottom, whether it's the ease of project development or whether it's just the fact that it's coal and nuclear are the ones that people have been so used to in the past. But that's for another time. Claire, thanks very much for your time this lunch.
Thanks for having me.
Who is the Director of Africa, Programme Director of Africa Utility Week.